Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good day I bid to Dr. Abdullah and all my fellow classmates. We are from Group 9 and will be presenting our poster's presentation, which is the annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation. Before we start, I will be introduce our team member and our part in this poster's presentation. I am Dayangkku will be explaining about the main actor and the conclusion later on, followed by NORSHAZA, HANIS and NURIZZATI, NAJWA, who are going to explain further about the main issues. Next, we have Danish as our leader. He will continue our presentation by explaining the possible solution. HYCHNTHIA NIUT will be presenting about the challenges of practicing the solution, and followed by ABDUL MANNAN, who is going to explain about the alternative if the solution not workable. So without further ado, let us proceed our presentation. Thank you. The main actor of this issue is between Ukraine and Russia. In November 2013, the President of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, has decided to withdraw from signing the Association Agreement AA with the European Union EU. The crisis at that point extended and prompted to the annexation of Crimea, directed by Russia in 2014. It is likely the most difficult event for the establishment of international law over the decade, as the annexation has disregarded the Budapest Memorandum of 1994. After the end of Cold War, Ukraine has become a focal point of geostrategical interest. The intention is to draw Ukraine closer to Europe by signing an association agreement with the European Union. But immediately after Yanukovych's overthrow, pro-Russian troops took control of Crimea and initiated an incremental process of annexation of Crimea to Russia. To add more, on 1st March of 2014, the Russian Council has approved the utilization of military power on the territory of Ukraine. Other than that, Russian troops in Crimea also were built up and assembled at the Ukrainian border. From the perspective of international law, accepting Russia's absorption of Crimea is wholly inconceivable. It would severely, perhaps even fatally, undermine Article 2(4) of the UN Charter and the international legal security architecture. Other than that, Russia's annexation likewise violated the border treaty finished up by Russia and Ukraine in 2003, in which Russia had perceived Crimea as a feature of Ukraine. I will pass now this presentation to my team member, NORSHAZA, HANIS.
Thank you, Sarah. Now we present the main issues. I'll start with explaining the timeline of the annexation. So, the crisis started in February 2014 when revolution was initiated by the Ukrainian people against their president Viktor Yanukovych after he refused to agree on Ukraine-European Association Agreement. The massive protests led to President Yanukovych fled to hide in eastern Ukraine, then to Russia. The interim government of Ukraine was appointed after Yanukovych fled Kiev. Crimea Prime Minister Anatoly Mohyliv, who is a pro-Ukraine, recognized the new interim government in Kiev and stated that Crimea is bound to accept and follow all laws passed by the Ukraine government. This angered Russia ethnic in Crimea, resulted in mass protests against the Ukraine government in Sevastopol. And the protesters proceeded to elect Alexei Charlie, a pro-Russian activist, the mayor of Sevastopol. On 27 February 2014, the Council of Ministers in Sevastopol and the Supreme Council of Crimea was successfully conquered by the Russian forces. At the same time, Russian forces and Russian separatists, noted as a Little Green Men, were occupying the Crimea Parliament building to put pressure on Ukraine government by demanding for Crimea referendum. So, on March 2014, Sergei Aksyonov, a Russian-born, was appointed as the new Crimea Prime Minister. However, Aksyonov as Prime Minister was illegitimate. On 6 March 2014, the Crimea MPs were forced to vote for conduct of referendum for Crimea independence. On March 16, 2014, Crimea held an illegal referendum where the public will vote for reunification with Russian Federation, or they will continue as part of the Ukraine territory. The result of vote showed favor towards reunification with the Russian Federation. So, the legal issues surrounding the Crimea unification with Russian Federation. Russian Federation intervention and use of force in Crimea is illegal. Russian military forces occupied significant buildings in Crimea, such as their parliament and their Supreme Council. The troops also blocked airports, ports, and roads that connect Ukraine with Crimea. The presence of Russian troops in Crimea is viewed as threats toward Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Russian action also violates the United Nations Charter Article 2, Paragraph 4. United Nations Article 2, Paragraph 4 stated that all members shall refrain in their international relations from threats or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. Although President Putin argued that the act corners to the United Nations Charter Article 1, however, the Russian Federation have breached the first and second obligation of Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons Memorandum. The first point of the memorandum stated that all countries that signed the memorandum is to respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing border of the Ukraine. The second point of the memorandum asserts that all countries shall refrain from the threats or force against the territorial integrity or political independence of Ukraine, that none of their weapons will ever be used against Ukraine. Now I will pass the floor to Najwa. Thank you.
Next, I will talk about Ukraine response. After the annexation of Crimea since April 2014, the government of Ukraine halted the flow of water from Dnieper River south to the North Crimea Canal. The consequences of water flow constraints can be seen after 7 years of this problem, which led to water shortage in wide areas of the peninsula. Ukraine also suspended all the train and bus operation to Russia and Crimea due to security issues. The only way to get to Ukraine is by car or by an old ferry service to the east of Russia. Next, the resolution of UN. UNGA adopted Resolution 68/262 on 27 March 2014 due to the failure of UNSC to resolve the Crimean crisis. However, the resolution seems to be unable to resolve the tense situation. Later in 2019, UNGA adopted another resolution, which is resolution urging Russian Federation to withdraw its armed forces from Crimea, expressing grave concern about growing military presence. In this resolution, the UNGA expressed its disapproval of Russia increasing military activity in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov because it has worsened the tension in the Kerch Straits and the Sea of Azov. Later on to 2020, the UNSC held another meeting. In that meeting, it was discussed that when all Russian soldiers leave, then the freedom of eastern Ukraine would be considered complete at that time. Next, the legitimacy and recognition of the annexation in international law. The European Union, EU, initiated a non-recognition policy, which includes officially opposing Crimea annexation as illegitimate and supporting Ukraine territorial integrity. Estonia was able to play a critical role in EU in developing an accurate overview of its member states' non-recognition policy. The aim of this policy is not to recognize action taken by Russia in the territorial changes in Ukraine. Next, the sanctions imposed on Russia. On July and September 2014, economic sanctions were imposed on Russia by the European Union, which targeted economic sectors since the issue of the annexation of Crimea arose in 2014. The European Union has blacklisted companies and people involved with the Russian administration of Crimea. There are 177 people, along with 44 other companies and entities that have been blacklisted. The blacklisted people and firms that have their assets in the European Union, it will be frozen, and also travel there will be prohibited for the blacklisted people. Next, I will pass the presentation to Muhammad Danish.
Next, I will present about the possible solution for the both countries for this conflict. As we know, the Russian-Ukraine relationship has been in a bad state, and this relationship has been getting worse in recent time. There are several possible solutions to this conflict, which is sending a peacekeeping force to Crimea. These peacekeepers are under the UN, which help solve all the problems that occur around the world. With the presence of this team, it can resolve the conflict that occur in Russia and Ukraine, such as helping both countries that are facing a difficult path to resolve problems from conflict to peace by negotiate with the both countries to find the best solution. The peacekeeping force also resolve the ongoing aggression and human rights violation in Crimea. This is of concern to the UN because it involves the public where there are unnecessary that due to these two country conflict. Another possible short-term solution is the withdraw the military from Crimea. The situation in Crimea is like a war zone where many Russian and Ukraine troops are around the area, and this caused the conflict between two countries become more worse. This has led the possible of world war due to the fact that both countries are ready with their troops and Ukraine has revived assistance from NATO to go to war. To prevent this from happening, both countries can withdraw their military from Crimea in order to find a better solution such as ceasefire or negotiation cooperation between the two countries. Through this military withdrawal also can reduce the debt toll and spend the money to the military. That's all for me. Thank you.
There are various ways we can do to address this issue, but however, there are still challenges that we will be receiving too. Based on whether we think Russia is satisfied with its repartition, realism taking the West in the right direction. So there is no consensus on the dividing the line between the Russia and West, and violence is used to determine this. In addition, the disagreement will also be impossible to fix. This is because the attempt to reach the ceasefire will not last more than a day, and Russia has rejected the Ukraine's proposal to send a UN peacekeeping force to Donbass. Ukraine and the United States want peacekeepers to be stationed on the officially recognized by Russian Ukraine border, while Russia prefers along the ceasefire lines. So in this sense, the Cold War comparison may be particularly helpful. Even though many people in the West admit that Russia is unlikely to abandon the annexations of Crimea and are prepared to accept recognition and formal legalizations, is of the various response for the disputes and the corresponding decisions still exist in Russia. The belief that both parties are rival once again hinder cooperation and trust is at the lowest point in history, which make it difficult to find common ground. Even if an agreement was reached on the recognizing a new status quo, it will be wrong. Neither the West or Ukraine can return to the pre-war downturn. Western government must continue to act under the current assumption that a military intervention.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Therefore, we'll talk about the alternative resolution, which feasibly could stop the annexation of Crimea entirely. The annexation of Crimea could feasibly put to an end by reaching an agreement of win-win negotiation between the countries. Having said that, the provisions of the Article 40 of the United Nations Charter specifically focusing on the negotiation before taking it to the Security Council by means before making the recommendations or deciding upon the measures provided in the Article 39. There are many reasons why the Russians have been hastening the war in order to get the full control of Crimea, considering the strategic location of the Black Sea, with the natural resources given such oil and gas, and the gas field in the area of Yuzov. Thus, the alternative resolution is suggested by reaching of an agreement of win-win negotiation between the countries, which actually an approach of mutual gain by making offers that are good for Russia and great for Ukraine as well.
As the conclusion, we can say that Russia has violated many international law during the annexation. An avocation for Russia acts is not given where international law did not permit Russia to mediate to separate Russian citizens, and it did neither permit a mediation in Crimea upon Yanukovych's invitation. Therefore, from the perspective of international law, Crimea still belongs to Ukraine, whatever the de facto situation may look like. Even though the dispute has been an international issue for a decade, yet there is no solid solution for it. By sending peacekeepers also helps the country in crisis to negotiate to find a better solution for both interests and to avoid from the war to occur. That's all from us. We appreciate your time for paying attention and thank you.